Good day, and welcome to the Plant Engineering webcast, How to Maximize ROI on EAM Software, sponsored by iOffice's Manager Plus. I'm your moderator, Kevin Parker, and I'm happy to join you today on behalf of Plant Engineering. Here are some tips to help you get the most from today's webcast. If you experience issues with the slides or audio, refresh the browser or click the Refresh Media button under the presenter's picture. You can control the volume of this webcast by adjusting the volume on your computer or on the webcast platform. If you are having technical problems with audio or the slide presentation, click on the question mark at the top right-hand corner of the screen to access a list of system checks to try before contacting an online technician. If you do need a technician, type a message in the Ask a Question box, and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. You can also type questions for our speakers in the Ask a Question box. The live Q&A session will begin after the presentation concludes. Today's webcast is being recorded. You will receive an email within a week with the link to the on-demand event. To download a certificate of completion, a PDF copy of the presentations, and other additional resources, use the Event Resources tab on the left-hand side of your screen. These documents will also be available with the on-demand version of this webcast. Now we will hear from the sponsor of today's webcast, iOffice's Manager Plus. At the conclusion of the video, you may experience a few seconds of silence to compensate for varied internet speeds. Please stay tuned after the video for today's presentations. Welcome back. I'd now like to introduce today's presenters, Daniel Golub and Cody Gray. Daniel Golub is the Vice President of Growth Segment Sales and Progress for iOffice's Asset Division and is formerly the COO of Hippo CMS, based in Winnipeg, Canada. Cody Gray is the Director of Product and Design for the Asset Division at iOffice, which includes Hippo CMS and the Utah-based EAM solution, Manager Plus. Thank you for joining us today, gentlemen. And Cody, this floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Kevin, for that great introduction. So Daniel and I have been in the EAM and CMMS industry for many years. And what we wanted to do was present to you some critical must-know information on this type of solution. And we're going to do it in essentially two parts. On the left there, you'll see I will be taking you through a journey of understanding why an EAM is so critical in your organization. And I'm going to do that by explaining kind of what an EAM solution is, as well as a CMMS as well. I will continue with some case studies of some items and some projects we've worked on in the past. I'll do an exercise with the group on standardization, and then I'll go through some of the intrinsic benefits that you'll see as you implement an EAM that transforms your organization and improves it. Daniel, on the other hand, he's going to be going over what to expect when selecting and purchasing an EAM solution. And he's going to do that by showing you some market research. He's going to give you an information on functionality, as well as some tips and tricks on what to look for and what to avoid. And he'll also explain some of the costs that are involved with this type of a solution. So with that, we'll jump right into just talking about an EAM and a CMMS software. So most of you on this call, I would assume, have some sort of relationship with equipment management. And when we talk about who would use an EAM or a CMMS, these are individuals that care about, that have a vested interest in making sure that there's constant equipment uptime. We rely on equipment for our organization. So if we're a toilet paper manufacturer during COVID-19 and the manufacturing equipment for some reason isn't optimal and we're not able to produce enough, well, then that makes way for competitors, that makes way for contract violation, that makes way for dissatisfaction in the workplace. And so what I loved about the video you saw earlier is that when we talk about critical services, behind in the background is a ginormous fleet of professionals that maintain equipment and keep it going. And that really enriches all of our lives. And the EAM solution and the CMMS solution is essentially the tool that you would use to maintain an fleet of assets or a plant or the equipment that you're managing. Again, there's a lot of different roles on this call, so try to apply some of the examples that I will give you. So let's talk really quickly about a CMMS and an EAM. So a CMMS is the lesser of the two applications that asset management professionals use. A CMMS is a computerized maintenance management system and is really focused on the work, on the maintenance side. What work should be performed, number one. Number two, who should do that work? And number three, when should that work be done? That's the primary focus of a CMMS. Now, an EAM, on the other hand, is a larger solution. An EAM will always include a CMMS. So if you're looking for that functionality, you will always have, that we mentioned just a minute ago, that will always be included in an EAM. The difference is that an EAM is much larger in scope. It's focused on the asset management lifecycle. Some additional features that you would expect to see in an EAM would be things like asset efficiency and reliability tools. You might expect to see robust analytics and business intelligence tools. You should expect to see inventory and procurement tools. You'd expect to see enterprise level functionality for standardization and governance and API and integration capabilities. And you should always expect a high level of configurability and customization capabilities inside of an EAM to account for the different scenarios that you would face in managing different types of equipment. So with that understanding of your EAM and your CMMS, we're going to go into some of the benefits that you'll see in an EAM system. So this is a list of common reasons why organizations will reach out and purchase an EAM. Now, there are hundreds of reasons why, but this is just a compilation of some more common reasons. You'll notice those first two, extend the asset life and breakdown and downtime prevention. Those are really focuses of the CMMS. So we're trying to reduce costs, we're trying to prevent breakdown. But an organization generally needs much more in order to be successful, especially when you're trying to be competitive in the market. So things like on the right-hand side there, things like improved customer and operational satisfaction leads to a better product and more confidence in your organization. If you look down below, you'll see improved reportability and visibility. That promotes innovation in your company and process improvement if you're able to distill that information down through the organization. And safety initiatives ensure business continuity. Enterprise standardization helps ease the implementation of cross-functional norms and standards, as well as sets minimum expectation for usefulness and for quality. So you can see here that an EAM is going to give you a tool set that is going to expand way beyond just trying to reduce costs. And if you think about your asset management strategy that you're trying to implement in your organization, the huge takeaway here is that an EAM solution can, and I would argue should, give your organization a competitive advantage in the market, not just reduce cost or potentially check the compliancy box. So with that in mind, I'm going to run into a couple of case studies. I'm going to give you 3 examples of projects that I've worked on in the past to kind of highlight how an organization was benefited from an EAM. So the first example I'm going to give you, this is very memorable to me because this was one of the fastest, I guess, sales we've ever seen at a substantial dollar amount. So the problem was an organization calls us and says that they make parts for Boeing and that they had shipped some parts to Boeing and that these parts had defects. And Boeing came back and asked if they could see the maintenance records. They'd asked to see remedial action plan, and the company was not able to satisfactorily provide that. Now, I don't remember what their solution was, but I think it might have been not digital. So what happened was immediately their contract was put on suspension until they could remedy this. This was the reason for the haste in which they purchased an EAM solution so that they could distill information, they could improve customer satisfaction, they could share information with their client. And that was the whole goal of this. So, and here you can see that the EAM was critical, not just to reduce costs, but to just stay in business, right? So the EAM was the solution by which that was the avenue for them to stay in business and to stay competitive. All right, the next example. So this was a project I worked on for several years. This was an Army, this was a company that did privatized asset management for the Army. They had several bases, and they were essentially the stewards of a whole bunch of equipment on multiple Army bases. And the reason that they reached out to us for an EAM solution is because they had a CMMS solution, but the Army gave them a contract citation because they felt that it was not adequate to report analytically and show proper stewardship of the equipment. And so they had a contract that was an over $1 billion contract with the Army that was in jeopardy because they could not produce they weren't able to report, and they weren't able to show due diligence of their contract. So what we ended up doing is we revamped their whole asset management strategy, and we did some standardization across the bases. And I remember this took several months. We finally did a presentation to the Army officials that gave the citation, and I was the primary presenter of that presentation, and it was very tense. And everybody, because this was $1 billion contract on the line for this. Afterwards, we got done. Everybody heaved a sigh of relief. A few hours later, the Army official that initiated the citation came back and said, "Wow, we cannot be more impressed with the solution you've implemented." And they removed the citation, and business continued. Right? So what were the benefits from this company? So this company, one, they were able to implement some standardization and cost savings there. They were able to improve confidence in their organization. They were able to show and share information, and they were able to even glean insights into the equipment that the Army found very beneficial and was able to benefit from, which furthered the relationship with their client. So again, while I would say that reducing cost and reducing downtime is a critical goal, you will see that an EAM will extend more beyond that to be able to solve higher goals that the organization is going after. All right, let's go into our final example case study. So this one was really interesting. This final project that I'm going to share with you was a project that we worked on, which was a recycling plant. It was a series of them. I think they had 36 recycling plants. They specialized in tire recycling. And they were in an acquisition mode where they were acquiring companies, and they were acquiring them at a pretty rapid rate. And so one of their main pain points was that as they were acquiring these companies, they were not able to govern them. They weren't able to see utilization and things like that. Yes, this is where accounting kind of comes in. Accounting was able to provide fixed assets and capital assets and what they owned. But what they were not getting was, are these assets even usable that they're acquiring? Are they garbage? right? And they were not able to establish any sort of minimum degree of excellence or operating excellence. They weren't able to manage or even see operating efficiency across these sites. And so this was the reason why they decided to purchase an EAM, was so that they could get that visibility across all of the sites. This was a very big project, and it was very beneficial. They were able to see utilization. They were able to identify equipment that should be retired as they acquired new companies. They were able to do equipment assessment. They were able to improve on the plants and the sites that maybe lacked. When you're doing budget planning and they only have so much money, they were able to allocate that money where it was most impactful because they were able to get this insight. So this was a huge project on standardization and governance. Now, one other interesting thing about this project is a couple of years later, they had a major fire in several of their plants. Tire material, as it's accumulated and as it sits outside, has the tendency to combust under the sun. And so they had several facilities that had this combustion incident occur, and it turned into a giant fire, which then turned into a whole bunch of issues with litigation and safety concerns. So now these tire piles were not under the jurisdiction of the EAM at the time, but they realized that they could quickly extend the ability of the EAM to introduce new inspections and sensoring data all the way down to their tire piles to be able to catch issues before they happened. So we saw a huge extensibility project as they were able to utilize a tool that they had already implemented and had success for into other areas of the plants. So one takeaway here is, if you can get a good baseline in your EAM, that you will see additional usages and tracking of the information across the years that you might not know or have encountered yet. But having that baseline already established will be you'll be way ahead of the game when something like this occurs. So here are some examples of how we were able to utilize inspection data, corporate governance to be able to just establish norms, standard operating procedures across a company that was growing, and then later on to extend it into other areas. All right. Now, as we transition, I want to do an exercise with the group. This is a standardization exercise. So this is whenever we get a company that comes on board and is trying to implement an EAM, one of the challenges they always have is data organization. And I'm going to give you an example of what we kind of go through in an implementation like this. So the scenario is this. We're going to pretend that we are a box manufacturing company. We make cardboard boxes. We make the cardboard. We take orders from our clients, like let's say Dyson vacuums, and we will print the designated graphics and content onto the box. We will cut them and we will glue them, and then we will ship them to our customer. And we have a customer, Dyson, who manufactures vacuums, and we provide the boxing. And then Bose headphones, where we have smaller boxes, and so we do all kinds of boxes, and we make the cardboard. So we have 4 plants here represented here. So you have your first plant, and this is how each of the plants catalog or categorize equipment. Okay, so in plant number 1, they're not using an enterprise asset management system. They all have their own list. So plant number 1, you have the manager is essentially classifying them as equipment and vehicles. Very simple. In the second plant, the manager is getting much more granular. He says, we classify equipment as folders or gluers, cutters, conveyors, the corrugator, rolling stock, and so we've got it all organized this way. But at plant number 3, you can see that they're organizing it more departmentally. So manufacturing equipment is segregated differently from the facilities equipment. So we talk about the pneumatic tooling or the boiler and other things that support the equipment in the plant. And then we have vehicles, and then we have the grounds in the building. And then lastly, our last manager, she classifies it as areas of the plant: front line, back line, the shipping area, the receiving area, and the administration area. So the takeaway here is, when you begin to implement EAM system, what you're going to see is there are many ways to classify your equipment. If you look at manager number 2, this manager classified equipment by what it was very specifically. When you looked at number 3, they classified it as departmentally. And when you look at number 4, you're looking at it by location. Now, none of these are wrong, but as you begin to peel back the onion and you begin to do your analytical data, you may have need to report on a certain line. How much money or what kind of repairs are we seeing in this line versus that line? Or what are we spending in the shipping versus the receiving, right? But then you may want to look at it from another dimension. Take it from the point of view of manager number 2. And you may want to look at it by, well, tell us how we're spending so much money on the gluers, right? And so the point is that an EAM is going to let you use all 4 of these examples. So you will have many dimensions of data, and the way that you construct it, you can actually run a report on any of these. But the important thing is that we have to come up with a standardization and a way that all the plants are going to be looking at this data so that we can report cross-plant, right? So many dimensions of data, cross-plant. I'm going to do the example again, but this time we're going to do it by the way we classify work. All right, so plant number 1, they're simple folk over there. They classify things as simply repairs or PMs. In plant number 2, we're going to get a little more granular. We're going to see repair, rep, corrective, fix, emergency repair, and standard work. You may find issue with this one, and I hope you do. If you did, we'll come back to it. But this is one of the more common issues we see when standardizing data. All right, plant number 3, we're getting really granular. Replace apron, fix motor, replace motor, PM, PMA, PMB. And then plant number 4, you have corrective, predictive, preventive, line call, and project. So when you look at plant number 2, one thing you'll notice is that they're calling the same thing. They're calling out a repair and a fix and a corrective work order. And so when a technician on his mobile app goes out to do a repair and create the work order, and he sees the drop down to do a repair, which one does he choose? Does he choose fix? Does he choose corrective? This is a very common thing we see, especially when we see them coming from a CMMS or a less regulated system. We see this activity a lot. And so we want to standardize across all of the plants kind of what we're doing. But at the top level, plant number 1, repairs and PMs, that's really like the first level, the first layer. And then plant number 3, where you're getting down to the specific services, that's when you're drilling in to those different areas. You know, at the end of the year, you might say, how much money did we spend in repairs? And we'll give you a number, you know, X million dollars or X $100,000. The next question you ask was, well, what kind of repairs have we been doing? What are the most common repairs, right? That's where plant number 3, giving you the breakdown of the services performed, is really critical. And your EAM solution should be able to provide that to you. It should be able to provide a top level repair and PM breakdown, and then it should also be able to give you the breakdown of services performed, even parts replaced, as you begin to drill into the data. Number 4, one area that I want to kind of call out is the line call. So it's common that you will have a suspicion. You know, we spend a lot of time or a lot of money doing X. We're responding to operator training needs, right? Well, you tell that to your manager, and the manager says, well, it doesn't seem that bad to me, right? And if you begin to track this work and you begin to look at the services performed, you are able to make a quantitative analysis and the ability to make an argument that maybe it is a problem, or maybe it isn't, right? But the quantitative data is what makes an impact in the end. So through this example, the major takeaway is that there are many ways to look at data. And your EAM should give you that capability to look at it from many angles, right? Where is it in the plant? What kind of work was being performed? What make? What type of equipment, right? What industry, or I'm sorry, not what industry, what department was it in, right? So all of these, and you can think of some others to apply to your own situation. And that's what's so important about an EAM, is because it is highly configurable, unlike a CMMS, you will be able to, or you should be able to, configure your EAM to get those types of reports and analytics that you want. All right. So finally, I want to talk a little bit about how an EAM transforms your organizational culture. So a few years ago, we did a 46 plant implementation of an EAM and for a organization that has plants in the US and Canada. And I got an email from their project manager 6 months after we went live. And he said this, quote, "Our GL reporting shows us trending approximately $400,000 to $500,000 less in branch production equipment expenses for repairs this year versus last. We can assume that the EAM is the reason for that." So this was an organization that was already doing preventive maintenance very well. They had a corporate level engineering team that was fantastic. They had highly regulated rules. They were able to have engineering conferences. They were doing their PMs. They were documented. In fact, I remember when we implemented them, they had all of their PMs already defined in a pretty good format. So it was a pretty easy implementation. So the question is, if they're doing so fantastically, how does a software application or an EAM, how did that even help them? Like, how are they all of a sudden receiving this benefit when they were supposedly doing so great? Okay. And the answer is that your EAM, if implemented properly, should have an intrinsic cultural change on your organization and affect them. So number one, you're going to see more engagement from your teams. EAMs often have capabilities that are engaging. So for example, you may introduce an operator solution that gives operators the ability to submit requests on the equipment. They also may be able to perform pre-shift or pre-operation or post-operation inspections. This extends activity or participation in your asset management strategy. So you're going to get more engagement. The other one is you're going to see more visibility and sharing of information. There's the famous Pearson's law that says when performance is measured, performance improves. When performance is measured and reported back, the rate of improvement accelerates. So if you are sharing information, if your EAM becomes centric in providing KPIs or trending data that the team can rely around or can rally around, and they can see objectives and that they can see if they're achieving those objectives, that can produce job satisfaction and that they know what they're working on, but it can also improve visibility, and everybody understands that the equipment is at the forefront of everybody's mind, and you don't have to tell them that. The EAM and the utilization of the EAM tells that story for you. And then the other big one is mobility and extending accessibility. So when you look at the mobile applications out there and other tools that your EAM is going to introduce, what that means is that a mechanic or a technician could have all kinds of asset data at their fingertips simply on their phone or on their tablet. So that means that I rely on this. I can scan a piece of equipment. I can look at its last work or its last repair or work order. I can then pull up documentation or PDFs or videos or spec data, all from my phone. You now have created a reliance, and you've also created the ability for information to be shared almost anywhere, right? So these, even if you have a fantastic, just like this company that we worked on, even if you have fantastic operational standard operating procedures and you have tools, an EAM will still have an effect culturally and organizationally to just shift the mindset and help everyone understand and be on the same page. And this is what an EAM really is aiming to do. It's supposed to be at an enterprise level, we're sharing information, and at an enterprise level, we have standard operating procedures, we have standard operating norms, and this helps us as an organization become more competitive. It helps us create more confidence to our consumers or to those that utilize our products or to rely on us for a service. So with that, I'm going to hand the baton over to Daniel Golub. He's going to give you kind of a better journey on understanding just what it's like to go through the purchase of a system like this, some tips and tricks on what you should look for, some cost breakdown. And with that, Daniel, I'll pass it to you.
Hey, thanks, Cody. Thanks for doing such an awesome job on introducing EAM and its benefits and sharing some really interesting success stories. That was really awesome. So I'm just going to shift gears here. I'm going to just pull back the agenda and just kind of do a quick recap before I get into the last portion of the webcast. And for the last portion, I'm going to pivot. I'm going to pivot a little and start by sharing some information, interesting statistics coming from a mix of resources, some from industry analysts and others from internal studies we at Manager Plus performed to do, really to better understand our customers and what's important to them. And after going through the market research and statistics, we'll look at ways to maximize your return on investment for EAM software. And this is really a hot topic and really important for anyone or any organization who's considering implementing an EAM, or for companies who have already made the investment but want to step it up and get more out of their investment. So we're going to cover things like how to evaluate different EAM products. We'll take into consideration the feature offering, but we'll also be looking at the importance of ease of use. We'll discuss how to consider user reviews and follow up on references. And I'm really going to stress the importance of customer support and understanding the customer journey. So what's really super cool is that the tips that we cover here are not just limited to EAM or a CMMS. Rather, these are really transferable to almost any business software that your organization uses or is considering. So ultimately, the hope is that we leave here today really understanding what EAM software is, how it can help your business, and the ways to make the most out of your investment if your company does decide to go down that path, and hopefully avoiding some costly pitfalls and really simplify the evaluation and implementation process. Okay, so you should see on my screen here, the EAM market is expected to grow by over 60%, reaching a whopping $8.2 billion by 2024, which suggests that businesses are increasingly looking for effective solutions to manage their assets. And why is that so important? A company's assets represent one of the largest expenses in their balance sheets, and I believe it's second to human resources. So it's really, really no wonder why today's businesses are increasingly looking to implement a system that empowers managers to get deep insights into the health of their assets and also the performance of their assets. Ultimately, managers need peace of mind knowing that their investments and assets are being managed properly. So I'm going to share some interesting statistics we at Manager Plus have gathered over the past 2 years. And as part of our process, prior to our software demonstrations or engagements with customers, we have people that we're speaking with fill out a quick survey, and just so we have a deeper understanding of their business requirements and needs. And our sample size here, you should see, is almost 2,500 respondents. So it's pretty fair to say that any effects from outliers are taken out of there, and also it's quite a reliable sample here. And one of the questions that we ask is, what are you currently doing to track your assets and manage maintenance operations? And to keep it simple, we offer 3 options to select. So the first one being, we're doing nothing at all, okay? The second one is we use paper and pen or spreadsheets, which I'm sure some of the audience are maybe in that camp as well. And this just alludes to using manual methods. And then the third option is we are currently using a system. We have a system in place, either an EAM or something comparable to track assets and maintenance operations. So really, what's so surprising here is that we find is almost 80% of the companies and organizations that we're speaking with are either relying on paper and pen or spreadsheets or doing nothing at all. So going back to the growth projections of the EAM market, we expect that this number will decrease, meaning decrease the number of people that are not using software significantly over the next few years. So in the same survey, we asked asset management and maintenance professionals what EAM features are most important for your business. And what we mean here is, in the process of researching your EAM or CMMS, what functionality really matters most to your business? And the questions were framed in a way that lists your standard key features and functionality that you would normally find in an EAM software, and ask the respondent to mark them as either very important, somewhat important, or not important at all. And the findings are really interesting. Over 90% felt preventative maintenance and tracking work orders were very important. So that's almost everyone. That was a high priority item. where 70% felt being able to use mobile devices and track assets and equipment management were also very important. And then 49% felt being able to run reports on equipment costs, material costs, parts costs, labor costs. These were very important items. So these findings, they don't diminish the importance of higher level functionality, like condition monitoring and predictive maintenance, life cycle analysis, integrations with other business applications, but it does highlight that their highest priorities are pretty simple, and suggesting that their current state lacks maintenance and asset tracking. So now I'm going to shift gears a little here, and let's get into some best practices for evaluating different software solutions. I'm going to share some tips that will help you to make an informed decision, and this will be helpful for those of you that are currently considering implementing an EAM or similar type of software, or if not now, sometime in the future. So this is just, you're seeing some results here in a more recent survey that we conducted, where we asked respondents to rank what is most important to your company in deciding on an EAM or CMS system. And interestingly, ease of use was the most important factor. Almost equally important was functional requirements, but this may be surprising to some, but ease of use is the most important factor when making a decision, followed by meeting the feature requirements. Cost, as would be expected, is also an important factor, and this is followed by customer support offered by the vendor. And then we were seeing that integration with other software systems and user reviews and testimonials were somewhat less important. So it's interesting that ease of use being the most important across these companies. We're seeing this trend, and it's consistent with, there's a theory out there, the technology acceptance model, where it talks about perceived ease of use is directly related to user adoption, which is super important, and we're going to stress this throughout the webcast. User adoption is obviously something that is pivotal for successful implementation and for the project to succeed, and ultimately for you to get a return on your investment. So software that's easier to use and less intimidating for end users is going to be adopted more and used more. So on this slide, we have some other interesting statistics, and what I'm showing here compares top performing facilities, those that are showing exceptional performance in ways that they run and operate their facilities, and comparing it to the norm, or so your average facilities. And this illustrates the difference in way top performing facilities and normal facilities, average facilities, use maintenance systems to manage their operations and track assets. So what's interesting here is, overwhelmingly, top performing facilities rely on predictive maintenance and preventative maintenance processes mostly, whereas reactive maintenance is relied on mostly by the average performing facilities. So, these findings suggest that utilizing technologies that equip companies with predictive and preventative maintenance strategies have really positive outcomes on performance. So on this slide here, we're just looking at, I call them some scary numbers. So, this is taken from two studies that were done by Reliable Plant, and the one on the left, the 80%, it's basically talking about implementations and success rates of implementations. And historically, this is referring to CMMS implementations, but some of this is transferable over to EAM. Historically, CMMS implementations saw pretty high failure rates, and the findings do vary based on how you define what is a failed implementation, but the studies show failure rates anywhere from 50 to 80%. Okay, and these findings emphasize the importance of ease of use and user adoption. I'm sure Cody will agree. We probably can't tell you how much and how frequently we have conversations with those that are interested in Manager Plus, potential customers, telling us that they purchased an EAM system or something that's similar, and they never got it off the ground. And often you'll hear stories that, they've implemented a system or attempted to implement something, and they've been paying for it for 3 years and really never got it off the ground. And one of the most frequently cited reasons was poor user adoption, and it's too complicated for our end users. So we're going to talk more about like how do we avoid that. And yeah, they come to us and they say, hey, we're looking for something that's a little bit more easier to use and scale down on possibly, all the functionality that we didn't end up using. Another shocking finding there is that you see on the right side, the 94%. So basically in this survey, this is also done by Reliable Plant, they found that only 6% of companies using a CMS felt that they take full advantage of the functionality they purchased, which really suggests that they bought more than what they needed and or possibly were overzealous on the functional requirements when they initially did their evaluations and vetting of different software products. It also can suggest that, perceived ease of use is lacking. So those that decided to purchase the software or move forward really didn't understand how the end users would respond. And it also can allude to lack of vendor support to ensure that users are making good use of their investment. So, these are things that we're going to talk about. You want to ensure that, when you are looking at products, or you do have the support from the vendor, and there's frequent touch points ensuring that you are making the best use of the software and the tools that you did subscribe for. Now we're going to talk about ways to maximize the ROI on your investment. So we're not going to calculate ROI, but we're going to talk about ways to get the most out of the investment and also to make the right decision when you do decide on a product. Okay, so first thing we always recommend is you delegate a project owner. This might seem obvious, but it's not uncommon for us to come across organizations evaluating different solutions where they don't have a project owner, or there is some lack of ownership. The lack of ownership can really slow down the process, cause confusion, and lead to problems during the evaluation, purchasing, and implementation process, especially during the implementation process. So it's super important for someone to take ownership over the project. And we typically see ownership change throughout different phases of the process. So this is not uncommon. You may have someone who leads the evaluation and purchasing process, while have someone else who is responsible for the implementation. Doing all the fun stuff like working with the vendor and designing the implementation plan and setting up the milestones, collecting the data, that's really fun, and that needs to be migrated, and scheduling user training. So, someone needs to own this and be responsible and accountable for it. Having a project owner, is really important, and you should consider delegating different people based on the process. The next point here is be sure to do some research, on user reviews and references. So user reviews are really helpful, especially early on when you're selecting a few products to evaluate. So if you don't have a list of different products that you're currently considering implementing in EAM, and you don't have a set group of products that you want to look at, user reviews are awesome. They're great. There's tons of credible websites out there that collect user reviews, and they can be very helpful in narrowing down the software products that you want to look at. Really important here is just don't look at the positive reviews. Make sure you take the time to read the negative ones as well, and also look out for trends. So if you are seeing that users are consistently complaining about outages and downtime or poor customer support, it probably means that it's true, that this is an issue for them. Or on the flip side, if you hear users are consistently mentioning ease of use or great user experience or awesome experience working with the company, if this is consistently being mentioned, then it also is true. It's probably true. And one of the things you want to do as well is ensure that the reviews that you're looking at, they're relevant to your business. So look out for reviews that are from organizations that, one, are similar size, similar industry, and also try to find reviews that are recent. These are just some tips when you're looking at reviews. And there's websites like G2 Crowd and Capterra and Software Advice, Trust Radius, that specifically focus on business-to-business software and enterprise software. So they're great resources to get access to those reviews, and then from there you make your list of companies and products that you want to look at. And as you get closer to making a decision, this is a little later on after you've done some demonstrations and you've narrowed it down to a couple of products, it's always good to follow up with some references. Those folks who agreed to speak with you about their experience working with the software vendor, there should be a couple. And the same rules apply. You want your references to be businesses that are, have similar requirements as yours. So similar industry, similar size. Okay. Feature requirements. So of course, it's important to make sure that the software that you're looking for or product you're looking at meets your requirements. So always good to prepare a list of feature requirements in advance. And then what we always suggest is make sure you involve the right people and stakeholders. So you cover all the bases, cover the spectrum of required functionality. You will want to involve asset managers, facility managers, people from operations and maintenance, admin, and IT. So don't just limit it to, the asset manager. You might want to involve other people as well. And it is a delicate balance. Remember that only 6% of companies from that study felt that they make use of all the functionality they signed up for. So it is a delicate balance. I would say be realistic. You want to think long term. The goal is not to purchase everything you might possibly need, but make sure that the product that you do look at can scale and meet your future growth objectives. And if you're coming from nothing, then your immediate needs might be to create an asset registry and setting up planned maintenance. However, a year later, you may want to run into run purchasing of parts and materials through the EAM and connect to other accounting systems. So you just want to keep that in mind and consider that for the future. So another suggestion is always make sure you do a few demos, software demos, or vendors are doing them at no charge, and usually they run an hour long. So look at demonstrations from different vendors. We always suggest looking at different, maybe 3. And don't just do it all in one demo. Take away, after a demonstration, give it some time to digest what you saw, look at a couple of products, and then come back and you'll have some more questions and you can bring it up in the second presentation. Okay. And we always suggest, when you're doing a demonstration and you're evaluating the software, make sure that you involve end users as well. This will really help out later on with user adoption and buy-in. There's nothing worse than having, the manager, the boss, purchase a system and implement it and really push it down on the end users without any of their input. And so their input is really, really valuable and give you a sense of, what tools will work best and what product will be best for the company as a whole. And here's another tip. Most software products, obviously, they offer free trials. Make sure you take advantage of that. That will help you to gauge the ease of use and the usability. So try them out and get your end user feedback. And some providers will even offer like a proof of concept or a pilot program where they spin up an instance that replicates your organization. And your facility layout, you can input your equipment and assets, workflows and reports. And this is ideal. And we at Manager Plus do this. We don't charge potentially new customers. If someone's interested in our software and they want to see what it would be like to manage their assets and see it in an environment that replicates very similar to what they would experience, we're happy to set those up. So proof of concepts or pilots are always suggested if the product, the vendor is willing to do that. And as we mentioned before, ease of use. So as mentioned earlier, ease of use, software is increasingly becoming more and more important. And having a system that's easy to use and that users will adopt and embrace really will determine the success of the project, and the implementation ultimately will maximize or help maximize the ROI. So ease of use has a huge impact on user adoption. It's really, really important. Also, the learning curve is much faster, so it really helps to speed up the implementation and the onboarding, and it really, minimizing the time it takes to start reaping the benefits of the EAM. So I'm going to just jump ahead quick here, and we're going to talk about considering all the costs. I know we only have about 10 minutes left here, so you really need to consider all the costs. The obvious ones are the direct intangible costs. These are the subscription and license fees and implementation fees. Also the ongoing professional service fees. These are, the obvious ones that are upfront, but also consider the indirect, or what we call intangible costs. And these are the things that, really involve time and labor. So the time to train and onboard your staff, the time to collect the data and, the migration, and also the procurement process. All these are costs because it pulls people away from their jobs and, ultimately, involve quite a bit of time. So when you're factoring these, the costs and the ROI, these are things that you really want to consider. And just one more thing on I wanted to talk about the customer journey and customer success. And I think this is really, really important. There is, especially if you're working with a software as a service or a SaaS product, there's been a transformation from customer support to customer journey and customer success. Customer support is a more traditional model and method where your users have experienced a problem, they're struggling with the software, and they'll reach out to the supplier or the vendor with a ticket and then asking for support. This is very reactive, and it's not the best model. So we're always waiting for issues to arise, and then the vendor will reply and deal with the issue as it comes up. The customer success model, which is very typical of a SaaS product, software as a service, this involves the ultimate goal is retaining the customer and increasing user adoption. So this is a more proactive approach where the vendor does multiple checkpoints with the customer, ensuring that they're getting the most use out of the software. They're using it to its full capability, understanding what features are maybe not getting enough use out of, and pointing in the direction of training, but really ensuring that adoption is there and it's maximizing the value of the investment. So I just pulled up these slides, and this is just kind of talking about a well-documented customer journey. And these are things that you should look for when you are looking at different CMMS systems or EAMs. Make sure that they do have a customer journey that is mapped out and documented, and ensuring that you do have that ongoing support where they're being proactive. With that, I'm just going to wrap it up here. I think we're getting to a point where we want to do a Q&A and answer some questions. So thanks for the folks at Plant Engineering, and thank you for attending, and let's get to the questions.
Well, thanks, Daniel. I thought both of the presentations today were very clear and cogent. The first question I have, Dan, is for you, and one of our listeners noticed that every time we refer to your company, we said iOffice's Manager Plus. So it certainly sounds like there's a little bit of a story there. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the relationship between iOffice and Manager Plus.
Absolutely. So Manager Plus has been around since 1992. We're out of Salt Lake City. And recently, actually in fall of last year, we joined the iOffice family, which is a company based out of Houston, Texas. They really focus on workplace management software, and we're just bringing Manager Plus into the family just to broaden it and really focus more on asset management as well. Cody, anything to add there?
Only that we also have a sister company, a CMMS, that's Hippo CMMS. So our full asset offering incorporates a full-featured CMMS and a full-featured EAM. So we have the full gamut of solutions on no matter what level you're looking for.
Great, thanks. Cody, question for you. Except right at the end where Daniel talked a little bit about the SaaS model, you really did not engage on the subject of cloud. And I know enterprise transactional systems have gotten a real boost from cloud. Why don't you talk about how your installed base is changing, and talk about whether you still have prospects that would rather have an on-premise system as compared to most people are thinking that the cloud is the future.
Yep, this is a great question. So typically these types of solutions have been on-premise. In fact, that's where our roots come from, as on-premise solutions. When we talk about an on-premise solution, you have to have a certain degree of IT infrastructure in place to support that. You have to have usually a database server, potentially a web server or an application server. These can be very expensive and they need to be upgraded and updated constantly. With a cloud solution, you don't have any of that overhead. So this allows you to roll out and implement faster. It allows you to access the data pretty much anywhere. The other thing it is the cost model is different. So in an on-premise solution, generally you paid a whole bunch of money up front. And in a SaaS model, you pay a subscription. And so what this does is this gives the power of leaving to the consumer because they're paying essentially a yearly or monthly subscription fee. When you buy a very expensive on-premise solution, you have just dumped a ton of money, and it's hard to let go of that. In a SaaS solution, you, as the consumer, have all of the power to kind of negotiate and move around if you need to. In addition, in a SaaS model, you are in constant update mode, so you don't have to be upgrading all of the time. The software provider does that for you, so you can expect enhancements throughout the years as you partner with a good growing EAM, which is something important. You want to make sure that your EAM provider is a growing company, lest it stagnates and you never get any sort of updates or fixes. A progressive company will be providing new functionality constantly. So,
great, thanks, Cody. Daniel, why is it, from your point of view, you talked about how EAM features are underused? Can you talk a little bit, one Doug asked, about how that kind of underuse issue can be overcome?
Sure. So that's a great question. So a lot of the functionality sometimes will be underused, or I guess in that study it showed that a lot of the times organizations feel like they're not using it to their investment to its full capacity. I think a lot of it stems from, one, it could be the feature requirements assessment initially is like I said, a little bit overzealous. You get a lot of people involved, which is great to get the full spectrum of requirements, but maybe it's slightly overzealous. But I think a bigger part is that once you've made the purchase, there's not a lot of follow-up ensuring that the customer is making the best use out of the software and taking full advantage of the modules and features that they subscribe for. So you really need to ensure that whatever path you go, you do set that expectation up with the company you're working with, saying, you know what, we would love quarterly check-ins, account reviews we call them, or biannual account reviews, where you do go through what your objectives were initially and then compare it to where you're at now. And great companies, great technologies out there where you can get analytics and data on what modules are being used and which ones are not, so that you can come prepared to those meetings, understanding what how well you're doing on certain, taking advantage of certain features. Let's say like report modules or work order tracking, where other ones you may not be making full use out of. And just have those account reviews with your customer success manager, and then set your objectives, and then come back 3 months later and do another formal account review and just check in to see how well you're doing. And you can have more frequent checkpoints even in between that. So I think it's just having that relationship with your provider and ensuring that they're able to determine whether or not you're taking full advantage of the modules that you subscribe to.
All right, thanks, Cody. Daniel, the final question of the day is for you. And in the very beginning, it was stated that the EAM system is for those who are most concerned about equipment in industrial locations. But what does that mean in terms of data and integration issues? Is it an issue getting all of that equipment data into the EAM, or what are some of the various strategies for people who are using the system to get more information about equipment?
Hey, Cody, can I lean on you for that one?
Yeah, I can take this one.
Yeah.
So data, I will say this, data and the way that you structure it, we kind of went over this in our exercise of standardization. the way that you structure your data is a very critical hinge point to the success of your EAM. Like, did we structure the data that we're able to report on? Now, and Daniel touched on this earlier, that when you consider all of the costs, make sure that you have maybe an implementation rep kind of help you structure the data. But generally, we can import this data right from a spreadsheet. We can import it from a web service. Importing data and migrating data is actually a very simple task. It's the organization that the business needs. That's the hard part. And that's where you kind of come in too, is helping us structure the data or understand the goals that you want to do. But importing data, no problem. We can even integrate. This is also a very common need. We can automatically pull data from a system in live time or close to live time, so that we are constantly hydrating data to another system or picking up data from another system. And those integration needs, or how you want your systems to communicate, is also something you'll want to bring up maybe to either your implementation or if you're looking at talking to a sales rep. Those are things you'll want to bring up to make sure that we understand those needs.
Great. Thanks so much, Daniel and Cody, for your participation today, and thanks to the audience for the great questions. I'd also like to extend special thanks to our sponsor, iOffice's Manager Plus, for sponsoring today's event. Now that we're just about done, we'd like to hear how we did. The exit survey will pop up on your screen as soon as the webcast ends. Please take a moment to complete it, because we use this information to improve our webcast. Finally, on behalf of Plant Engineering and iOffice's Manager Plus, I'd like to thank you for attending. That includes our webcast. Thank you, and see you next time.